Hello, welcome to Insight, everyone. I'm Nnamdi Odikpo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's edition of the program.
As we continue to celebrate the joy of the new year, Nigerians are yet again reminded to be cautious as most people currently battle to balance early expectations for 2022 against the presence of a threatening Omicron variant of the COVID-19. My conversation on the subject matter promises to be truly insightful. Elizabeth?
We will also be taking a look at sports developments in Nigeria and efforts at harnessing young talents for the sector.
Very well. That also promises to be quite interesting. Let's begin. I'm not a doctor or a medical personnel by any chance, but it will seem that increasing cases of cold across the country, or should I say an emerging flu season, more likely occasioned by the Harmattan, is creating some panic over the virology of the new mutation of COVID-19 called Omicron. Put that alongside worries over continued vaccine hesitancy in the country, and all of these worsens an already dire public health situation. The emergence of the Omicron variant into the mix is therefore considered a spanner in the wheel of progress as far as tackling COVID-19 is in Nigeria. But how much so? To clarify these issues, I am joined by Dr. Thairu Yunusa. Dr. Yunusa is the COVID-19 team leader at the University of Abuja Teaching Hospital, I beg your pardon, Gwagwalada here in Abuja. Welcome to the program, Doc.
Thank you very much. It's nice being with you to discuss this once more.
Wonderful. Just for context, Doc, should we be worried over a variant like the Omicron and the clinical severity when we consider the fact that we were able to somewhat manage the original variant of COVID-19 between 2020 and now, which presented far more severe symptoms, I dare say?
Well, thank you very much. I think it's, first of all, to thank you all for still on this, discussing the pandemic as it is, you know, and putting in the front burner. I would say that my answer will be in a two form. The first one is to look at the positive and also to look at what we call the alarming side of it. In terms of positive, I would say that we've been able to survive and also to actually break the jinx of what has been predicted of what will have happened if COVID-19 gets to Africa. And that was late 2019 up to early 2020. But we went above that and then we survived all those parts and the rest, putting up the health system. Even those health systems that are well developed in the world were overwhelmed. But we were able to weather the storm. On the alarming side is the fact that we have what we call the concept of climate change coming into the concept of COVID-19 pandemic. This is one of the first time we're having a pandemic coming in when there is what we call climate change occurring. This is when we now have a lot of the weather changing, a lot of things coming in, and a lot of dust coming in. So that is what keeps me on the alarming side. And this is something that should keep us worried, because if we are worried about something, it means that appropriate action can be taken. And definitely seems will not be above what the capacity of what we will be able to take. And this is something that we should all work together towards. So I am in part disturbed, but at the same time, I know that we will overcome as usual.
Doc, you've brought in the elements of the climate change, and in my introduction, you would recall that I made mention of an emerging flu season. I mean, you've been in the country for a bit. None of us have been able to travel as extensively as we did prior 2020 when COVID-19 hit us. And so I want to believe you're aware of the situation in parts of the country, largely and significantly across the country. When I mentioned the cold, emerging flu season here in Nigeria, lots of people are reported to be coming down with cold, coughing, catarrh, sneezing, and all of that. How does that exacerbate the situation?
Thank you. When we look at the clinical signs and symptoms presented by COVID, it is obviously very similar to what we have about tropical infectious diseases notably malaria, notably we talk about typhoid fever, we talk about some other things that are such as common cold and all those catarrh and all those stuff. They present the same clinical signs and symptoms as what we have in COVID-19, being Omicron, being Delta, being any one of them. But when we now look at the element that what are those factors that can actually aggravate and also precipitate, what we call them precipitating factors. These precipitating factors are well endowed within the element of what we call the climate, and then what we call the element of changing in weather. Now, when we have dust, haze, and we have all those things, it tends to dry up the mucosas. And once it dries up the mucosa, what we call the oronasal pharyngeal area, and that gives a lot of room for microorganisms, in that case, to go and seed themselves and then penetrate into those. And sometimes when you have this dryness of the mucosa, oronasal pharyngeal area, you have breakages and some what we call discontinuation of the mucosa lining. And that gives what we call an area for this to take place. For instance, when you have a vent on the wall, on the block, brick wall, what do you expect? Lizard, we go in, this, we going into that. When we go into the microbiology level, we will know that when there are cracks within those mucosas, those organisms can actually stay in there, go in there, establish themselves, and create what we call some of those symptoms that we all say that you have described, catarrh, cough, and the rest. This also gives the possibility for them to also be transmitted. When somebody sneezes, it sneezes out some of these viruses and the rest. It coughs out some of those viruses. And these viruses, because of the weather again, they are able to stay for a longer period of time in the air, meaning that easy transmissibility. So for this case, when we have the associated precipitating factor of the weather, this actually helps in transmissibility and also for establishment of infection leading to establishment of clinical signs and symptoms that you have described, sir.
Dr. Yenisa, in essence, what this means or could mean is that if I have had cough for some days, for instance, it's most likely or it's proper or I'm encouraged to go to carry out COVID-19 test, at least to know my status, to know if I'm actually down with COVID-19, and in that, of course, and then seek treatment if that's the case.
Fantastic. This is a very, very good move. If most of us can actually go on this move, it will really help us because we lose nothing to actually check ourselves and see what is actually wrong with us. For instance, when somebody have fever and the rest, then before they had
and you dismiss it as simple malaria. Please go ahead, Dr. Yenisa.
We go to test for malaria and see what is wrong with us. This is what is expected, that whenever anybody has element of cough and all those COVID, is cough, catarrh, and the rest, it's also good to include COVID-19 as part of the test that should be ruled out. Because if you rule that out, it gives you more confidence to actually take some medication and then know that that element of corona is not part of it. But, you know, this is an ongoing discussion. This is an ongoing thing that is taking. More medical practice and more medical tools are being coming in. That's why I, for one, actually advocate the emergence and also for distribution of what we call rapid diagnostic serological antigen lateral flow test. Okay. If this can be made available worldwide, in most communities, and everybody could have this test being done at home, which is a 7 minutes to 10 minutes test, that can actually help us to actually help to reduce this, most especially when we have already gotten into the community. Because it's expensive to do a PCR test, it is expensive to move this PCR equipment from community to community. It seems that one of the best tools that we have is to use what we call the screening test. The screening test using what we call the antigen lateral testing kits.
I do agree with you.
And I think that will help us a lot, because now we also talk about element of you doing what we call self-test for malaria. Yes. It seems that we can also do a self-test for COVID-19, and that will actually help. For anybody that actually have a positive test should go further to go and do the PCR test in those NCDC accredited laboratory for tests to be done, so that they should confirm if it is COVID, and then appropriate treatment should be taken. But as I've said, and I will always say, the clinical signs and symptoms of COVID-19 is so similar to what we have in malaria, so similar to what we have in typhoid, so similar in what we have catarrh, cough, and the rest. Respiratory viruses and respiratory bacterial infection are so similar, and we need to actually do a lot for ourselves if we actually go to screening and do a lot of screening tests, which I think that is the way to go. Screening test is one of the best ability to rule out a lot of what we call diverse infectious disease. And I think it's the high time for us to actually introduce this in the management of getting rid of this SARS-CoV-2, which causes corona, which causes the pandemic.
Dr. Yunisa, I hear you loud and clear. I mean, it may sound scary to some people or persons, but I tell you what you've said is very, very important. I mean, it makes logical sense for someone who's already tested positive to malaria to go test for COVID-19. But just so, forgive me, but I'll take you back to the issue of let me just take you up on the issue of vaccination now, but specifically how vaccines work. So I know that vaccines, they train our immune systems to create proteins that fight, that fight disease. These proteins are known as antibodies. Please, I would like for you to clarify how it is that vaccines that should work without making us sick are also likely to give reactions that make some people feel sick, sometimes for days. I'm asking this just so we clear up the issues or some issues and misconceptions as in once more.
Beautiful question. This is good. I will answer this question in about 4 folds.
Okay.
The first one is that how do vaccine works? The vaccine actually works, which is the same vaccine that we'll be giving to our children when they are growing up, when we give birth to them. How do they work? In the body, we have what we call antibodies. The first set of antibodies that actually we always know that we acquire is the antibodies that we acquire from the breast milk, what we call the cholesterol. It contains a lot of antibody, IgG. This IgG is enough to actually protect the young folks, to protect them against the emerging infectious diseases that will go into the body at that first stage of life, when the body does not have any much of the immune system not well developed. Now, this is the same antibodies that we are still talking about. Antibodies, that is a process and a serum process that can fight against infectious disease. But antibodies are usually specific. If you have an organism called Salmonella typhi causing typhoid fever, it has its own antibodies, and it is specific to fight against Salmonella typhi. If you have an antibodies that is against another organism, let's say an organism called AAA, the antibodies will be anti-AAA, which is an antibodies against AAA. In this case, we have antibodies that are created in the body against SARS-CoV-2, which is called anti-SARS-CoV-2 antibodies. Now, these antibodies can be produced in the body when there is what we call sensitization. Sensitization is the ability for an organism, when it comes into the body, the body is exposed to it. Mark my word, I said exposed. When the body is exposed to that organism, the body produces these antibodies. These antibodies are like what we call the memory cells. It remembers and watches and cares for our body. It stays in those bodies to wait for any emergence or any incoming of that same organism. For this case, we are talking about SARS-CoV-2. Yes. It means that if we acquire this antibody after an exposure, it means this antibody will not stay in our body waiting. If there's any SARS-CoV-2 coming into the body, it will eradicate it. In this case, we talk about what we call neutralizing antibodies, because there are different types of antibodies. Let me stay on that. Neutralizing antibodies simply means that if that organism comes in, SARS-CoV-2, antibodies in our body will neutralize it. Okay. But before these antibodies are produced, there must be exposure. And this exposure can be achieved through 2 ways. Okay. One of them, the exposure by which we call natural exposure, and the second one is an exposure which is called artificial exposure. Natural exposure is a phenomenon whereby you come into an environment, you don't even know that you have been exposed to the organism. For instance, for people like me and my other good young nurses and doctors and hygienists and folks that are working in most of treatment centers, they come in and they usually get exposed. Because you can't say that no matter what you put on your body and cover your body as if going to the moon, the SARS-CoV-2 has not entered into your body. But it enters in a very small load, in a small viral load, and creates that exposure. When that exposure is being created, antibodies line our mucosa, waiting for a subsequent exposure, and then it will eradicate it and neutralizes it. The second part of it is artificial. Artificial exposure is by different means. One of them is by vaccination. It simply means that the same element, the outer part of SARS-CoV-2, is the one that's been formulated, attenuated, and then made into what we call vaccine today.
Yeah.
Now, this vaccine, when it's given to us, we are also got exposed. And when we get exposed, then the body produces antibodies, and that antibody will be produced in billions and trillions of fold, lining our mucosa, staying within our oronasopharyngeal area, which is the point of entry of this virus, though.
Yeah.
And it means that whenever they stay there, they are waiting. If SARS-CoV-2 comes in any amount, they will neutralize it and take it out of the body, and they will remove it from the body. So, in essence, we are now saying that these antibodies are protective, and they should be able to remove those organisms when it comes.
So it is when these antibodies are artificially introduced and then the body or the person gets exposed that you get some sort of reaction to these artificial introduction. Is that when the person gets some allergies or some symptoms of sickness or, feeling weak and sick for this?
My dear, let me just say this. It's not artificial. The antibodies are not artificial. It is the
No, I mean when you are when they are artificially exposed, like you just enumerated or explained.
Artificially exposed by vaccination.
Yes, by
which
vaccination.
Is given to us, because we introduce it into the body in a very small amount. Now, once they introduce and get exposed into the body, we produce antibodies in large amount, specifically against what? Against SARS-CoV-2. Specifically against corona COVID-19, we popularly call COVID-19. And these antibodies, when it stays in the body, now takes it off. Let me give you another scenario. A scenario whereby somebody has not been vaccinated. He has not gone to treatment center, has not even gone, he has not been exposed to SARS-CoV. The first time the COVID-19 will come into the body, you can't imagine what devastating effect that will cause. But because this vaccine are being introduced into the body, then there may be a reaction. Now, this reaction can be in a different food. Yes. Our body is made up of different elements. We are all different. I am different from you. I'm different from my own brother. I'm different from my own sister. It simply means that the way I'm going to react to a new substance called vaccine coming into my body will be different from the way you are going to react. But these reactions are reactions that are not reactions that should actually make us too sick. Sometimes that element has been introduced into the body. For instance, if water is being introduced into the body, you expect no reaction. The person will not even feel anything. But for you to actually have had a reaction to show that antibodies are being produced to protect you, then there will be a reaction which will be like maybe maybe some sort of raise or increase the body temperature, of which paracetamol can actually take care of. And that's why when we give this vaccination, we tell them that take some paracetamol so that to mitigate or to ameliorate the effect of
So Doc, that
agent,
is
that the agent of the
Doc, if you just hold on a bit, the network, our connectivity is not so good, but if you can hear me, I get your explanation loud and clear. You've clarified that issue for me. I would like to hurry us along real quick because we're fast losing time. But let me just stick with the issue of vaccine now and say this, and ask you this rather. If the vaccines largely increase antibodies that fight the disease, does that translate substantially to a cure in the sense of specificity? Then, secondly, sometime back in 2020, you explained the COVID-19 treatment regimen here in Nigeria. Is that still the same, or has the availability of vaccines now changed the regimen?
Actually, some of those treatment that's being used in the country, rightly so. But I would say that fast track now to 2022,
yes,
we will say that the administration of the vaccines have actually changed what we call a lot of things that we talked about in vaccination. And that is the reason when a patient is being brought to treatment center or it's having COVID and make consultation, we always say, have you been vaccinated or not? If there's element of vaccination, then definitely we go into the protocol of what we give to patients that are being vaccinated.
Okay.
And in most times, breakthrough infection is one of those elements that we find when the patient is being fully vaccinated. But in this case, we've been having some element of patients that have been having breakthrough infection and when they are being vaccinated. But we all know that the effect or the clinical picture of what they present with is usually minimal. In fact, you find a lot of them that have breakthrough infection, positive with COVID-19 results, but they will tell you that I don't even have any signs and symptoms. This tells us that the vaccine is working. It tells us the vaccine is working, so that it has really changed in terms of what we give in terms of treatment, sir.
So I know the Presidential Steering Committee issues weekly updates on the national COVID-19 response in Nigeria, and I recall we developed one of the best practices in terms of isolation and quarantine guidelines after we were hit in 2020. Are these platforms still in place, and should it not seriously continue with issues like contact tracing, tracking and follow-ups as guidelines to reduce infection cases in Nigeria?
Beautiful. So these platforms are still available. The platforms are actively being worked upon. And we should say this, that we have to thank the Presidential Implementation Committee, that is from the Presidential Task Force. And you can see the element and accolades that the country has actually received from various world, WHO, everybody, the United Nations, all telling us that we have done so well, and at least we have beat what we call the prediction and the rest. These are some elements of what, and I will tell you, there are a lot of work being done in the background also that is being done by the Presidential Steering Implementation Committee, and I know all those work being done, painstakingly, sleepless night, trying to make sure that this contact tracing still continues. And I will tell you right very well in this platform to tell you that contact tracing is still going on actively. You will like to see, but for instance, people that travel and you ask them what was it like, they will tell you that when they come back, they will be contacted actively to tell them you have to go for your test, return test. If you don't go for your return test, there are other things that have been done to actually stipulate that to make sure they go. And I think that is quite good because that is also part of element of contact tracing. We also have to thank the people at the port end who are also helping us, sending information as people travel in and coming out of the country to make sure that they do those tests that are required for so that we will know. And we've known some people that have traveled, when they come back, they actually have positive result and the rest. And we've been contacted so that we follow up with them and make sure that they are being treated, to make sure they are being psychologically being talked to, and to make sure that they're being spoken with in the right manner, in the good manner for them to get with. I must say this to say that COVID-19, most of the management and treatment is usually psychological. In most cases, if you're able to win that psychological battle in the patient will do very well within a few days. And that is something that the Presidential Implementation Steering Committee has been doing very, very actively. And I think we need to thank the Secretary to the Federal Government chairing that and leading that move. And and then the current secretary of the committee. And they actively contact us daily. They ask us questions because we have a platform where we meet, and they ask us what is the trend, what is going on. And we have been reporting to them to tell them about the trend of treatment that will be having, the trend of the clinical science, and the trend of also monitoring, and also to do what we call the country mapping. I can write, it's not something that I can say now, but I can rightly tell you that within the Presidential Implementation Steering Committee, they know where, in terms of what we call country mapping, through the NCDC platform. They know the country mapping through addresses and the rest, where we have the largest burden of it. I know this discussion is not for me to say because they will also talk about that. Yes, and don't let me let the cat out of the bag. Okay. And I can tell you that we are doing a lot of things, and kudos to them for bringing people like us on board to work with them to make sure that we actually bring the technical part of it. And a lot of professors all over the country are all coming in to give their input. And I will say, the country is rightly covered, including places where we have border areas, because working together with the International Organization of Migration, IOM, a potent organization within the United Nations, actually a lot of work is being done to see people that comes in through the border and mapping them and trying to see if they actually have COVID, where are they going to isolate and things like that. So that is being done. I think a lot of work still has to be done at the level of the state, the government, the state government, so that the state government can actually complement the active involvement of the Presidential Steering Committee, Implementation and Steering Committee, such that in those states, even when people travel and come down to what we call international airport, as they move to their respective state, follow-up should also take place so that they can actually be reassured that not that they are being forgotten, but they still act because there's something we call long COVID, which is what we call long-term complication of COVID, so that a lot of follow-up can actually take place. They are trying, and I think more has to be done in terms of getting to reach people. It's not easy, but I think we have done very, very well. Kudos also to President Muhammadu Buhari actually leading the charge.
Well, of course, we must commend the Presidential Steering Committee. They've done lots of work, and I mean, these are commendable efforts. In rounding off our conversation, because we've, in fact, we're actually out of time, but I would like to take you up on the issue of population immunity. I read up a bit on the application of vaccine seroepidemiology for estimating population immunity, and I'm a bit intrigued with regards to our situation in Nigeria. But let me get your thoughts on the current level and ratio of COVID-19 vaccination in Nigeria and the prospect of vaccinating 111 million Nigerians in order to achieve herd immunity.
Fantastic. It's something that is ongoing, and I always believe that Rome is not built in a day. This is actually quite interesting when you look at the mutations that is taking place around the world, you know, with new variants coming in and the rest. The prospect of vaccinating 110 Nigerians for us to achieve what we call herd immunity. I think you are referring to what we call herd immunity, whereby 70% of the population can be vaccinated, and that will basically give us a herd immunity and then a protection for the country.
Is that put at 70%? Because I know that for polio, for instance, 80% of the population would have to be vaccinated. For measles, I do not recall, but I think for measles, let me check, I should have the figures somewhere around there. For measles, about 95% of the population has to be vaccinated for there to be herd immunity. So I know that for some time there have been attempts to place a figure at for COVID-19. I beg your pardon. It's been nations across the world have been unable to be specific as to which amount of the population has to be vaccinated to achieve herd immunity. Are you saying that for Nigeria it has to be 70% of our population, which is about 111 million, for us to achieve herd immunity? How viable and how feasible is that?
I would just say that from the information actually that I have, that up to there's a range. 70%, 80%, will be a very good idea, what we say. But because of movement of people, Nigeria travel a lot and the rest. So it's going to be very, very difficult for us to actually pinpoint on a particular figure. Rather, I would say it should be a range and the rest. But of course, we also have the Primary Healthcare Development Agency doing a beautiful work and a fantastic work on their own side to tell us more about that. But I would say that in terms of doing that, I think my own advice will be rounding up is to say that I think private sector has to also come in to assist the government in ramping up a lot of vaccination. I know that the international organization through UNICEF and United Nations Development Program, UNDP, and the International Organization of Migration are coming in to assist the country. And I know the federal government are all through the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency and NCDC are all working assiduously around the clock to make sure that we achieve a lot of 110 million Nigerians getting vaccinated. But I think that one of those areas is to get the public, to get the private sectors coming in, and also for us to actually allow for quality check on those private sectors that are ready to actually bring in the vaccine. When private sector comes in with vaccine, they can actually reach out to maybe the corporate organizations, and those ones will be out of those other ones that have been brought by international organizations and the rest, such that those ones can now go to the population at need. This is what we need to create what we call access to vaccine. If we have up to about 40 million doses of vaccine coming into the country, I think those ones can be channeled to those people that are less privileged, those people that are where to do, people in IDP camps and then other places, whereby the ones that is being brought in by private sector can go on towards the corporate organization who can actually pay a little for that, and then that can be. But I say that I believe that access to vaccination and equity distribution of vaccine can be achieved in the country. And I think the way we are going is we can actually achieve that in a very, very good time, so that we can actually catch up with the way the viruses is going into different mutations and giving us different variants. There's a new one that have come out from France now, the new variant. So the combat continues. But I would just say also that let's get adequately vaccinated. Let's get the booster in. I've been vaccinated. I've taken the first jab. Of course, I'm the second Nigerian to have the vaccine. I had the booster. I have fully vaccinated booster. And willingly, I will submit myself if actually it is the science actually says that we should have the fourth dose, such that we should get ourselves. The more antibodies are produced in our body, the more the more the exposure, the more the antibodies being produced in our body, the more we'll be able to get rid and prevent us from getting whatever any variant that actually comes. In this
Dr. Yonisa, we're totally out of time. This has been an very interesting conversation. I actually would have loved for us to continue, but we were short our target. Wanted us to take up the issue of vaccine hesitancy and talk a bit more on those with severe allergic reaction after vaccination and a whole lot of other issues. Unfortunately, I mean, the booster shots that you brought up just a couple of seconds ago was another issue I had wanted us to also dwell on a bit more, but maybe this is a conversation we'll continue in another segment or another episode of this program. But very quickly before I let you go, just one word, because I do know that it said that the booster shot is a 90% guarantee against fatality from COVID-19. What is the percentage guarantee of booster against infection?
I would say that I also believe in some of the work that we've done, collaborative studies that we are doing. We found out that up to this guarantee up to about 90%.
90%. Thank you so much, Doctor. 90%. That's fantastic, and that's reassuring, Doctor.
And I would just say, as my last word, to say that we should actually join hands together to work together with the Federal Ministry of Health to achieve this success. May
Very
God
true.
bless us.
Dr. Tairu Yunusa, COVID-19 team leader at the University of Abuja Teaching Hospital, Gwagwalada here in Abuja. Associate Professor, Medical Microbiology and Parasitology. I would like to thank you very, very, very much for coming on the program. Your thoughts on these issues have been very insightful. Thank you so much indeed for coming on Insight.
Thank you very much. We will be willing to come again and talk more about this and then talk about this more.
Indeed,
yes.
indeed.
Please get vaccinated. Please get vaccinated. Please get vaccinated.
Thank you so much. That's the word, get vaccinated. If you're out there and you're yet to get vaccinated, please go out there and get vaccinated. Thank you so much, Dr. Yunusa, for coming on Insight. Up next is Elizabeth Omorui.
Sports generally play an important role in enhancing the prestige and status of a country at the international level. It also helps in the process of national integration, youth empowerment, job creation, and foreign direct investments through professional sports. In Nigeria, sports started as a recreational event for entertainment in the 50s. That continued even after independence, before sports became professional in the country in the early 1960s. Over the years, Nigeria has executed different sports development policies aimed at enhancing the development of the sector to promote nationalism. How far have we fared in developing sports in Nigeria? That is our focus, and my guest, Seydou Jibril Oji, Secretary General, Commonwealth Handball Association and member Confederation of African Handball Arbitration Committee, will deal on the issue before us. Thank you so much, Mr. Seydou, for joining us on Insight.
Thank you for having me.
Now, sports is interesting. What is your assessment of sports in Nigeria?
Well, in the early 60s and 70s, I would say sports was more or less an interesting and very vibrant part of human activity in the world. Sport is a very lucrative and interesting venture. If people are willing to do as it is, I don't think we'll have any problem. Most of our youths are restive. They are restive because only sport can arrest most of these youths. When you talk of the athletes themselves, you see the athletes are not helping issues in the side that you have the non-governmental, the private people who are willing to support you, who are willing to provide all the necessary requirements, the encouragement that will enable you to grow further in that sport. The thing you start telling that person, I'm supposed to be paid so, I'm supposed to be paid that. This man is making everything available for you in terms of health, in terms of encouragement, education-wise, because most of the private people who are taking care of sport today, their first priority is they encourage most of the athletes academically. They will encourage you on things that will make you a better person tomorrow because they consider you going into that sport as somebody that is going to take sport as a profession, so that by and large, you may rely on that thing to become what you be in life, because most athletes today concentrate on what they are doing to be able to achieve a goal in future.
All right, I would like to take you on the issue of our local leagues. Now, apart from football, we have swimming, there's handball, volleyball, badminton, several sporting activities. Why are we not utilizing the enormous advantages as it is in other climes?
Thank you very much. You see, I remembered in the early 75, 78, not even recently, when Alhaji Yakmut was the DG of National Sports Commission, when Nigeria went to Congo Brazzaville for this Nations Cup, All Africa Games, the athletes were well taken care of. Welfare-wise, motivational-wise, they were well taken up. And Nigeria had a good output. Nigeria came with a better medals. Why was this so? Because all the events, all the federations were struggling to be able to see what they can bring out, because the athletes don't have an excuse. Their allowance were increased, their sporting kits were provided, their training equipment was given to them. Now all they need is to bring out their best. This man has made everything available with the little resources the federal government has given to him. But where you decide to say you are just pinching or looking at a point, which is strictly football, because everybody concentrates on football because money is there. FIFA makes available some funds, some dollars, and when we look at it, that is where our mind goes. We are financially inclined other than to be sport inclined. Most of us who call ourselves sport managers, sport developers, we are financially inclined. We don't think about the development of these youth. We think about the gain I am going to make for traveling with the children to America, for traveling with them to Spain, or whichever part of the world we are going. The quantum of money that will accrue into my pocket is what bothers me, not the welfare of the players. And at so doing, you do not feel that basketball, volleyball, and the rest sporting federations are not important. If we are there for the kids and we really want youth restiveness to stop in this country today, please, let's encourage sport development in Nigeria. And by so doing, go to the local government, go to the remote part of this world, you discover that by the time these young lads are into this sport and they know they get what it takes them to encourage them, they will leave the street, they will leave the guns and the machete that they carry. Nigeria will be the better for it when we invest into sport.
Don't we have investors coming in to invest in a particular sport? Oh, for example, handball, volleyball, swimming, badminton. Let's not even talk about traditional sports. That's another issue we'll deal with on the program. But swimming, handball, volleyball, don't we have investors coming in with their money to invest, to fund these sports?
Thank you. I think I happen to be a member of the Handball Federation of Nigeria, a board member. You see, once you want transparency, he who goes to equity must always have a clean mind. And once you think about what you are gaining and not thinking about the sport, then you don't get anything. Why am I delving on this issue is because we discovered that handball has sponsor, basketballers have sponsor. Volleyball, I learned they are struggling for a sponsor. Handball sponsor is only concentrating on the league. And once this money is given, isn't being used for the right thing? Let's be sincere with ourselves.
That's a very tough question.
Yes. Are we using it for the right thing? Are we accountable to the money we're giving? Are we doing what is expected of us to do? The sponsors are not too happy. It's not branding. Branding is not the answer. The main cause of a sponsor sponsoring a team is giving to the society what he has benefited from the society. And that is what we are know. Community contribution, that is what is called. That money should enshrine and go down, and people should see that the development of that sport is cut across, not concentrating on one category of a development of a sport. You cut across and let the sponsor know that, okay, we have youth development, we have the senior national team, we have the senior game. These are things we need you. Please, we want to give you a memorandum of understanding between we and you that these are things we want. Handball should be developed within these certain years that you are ready to sponsor us.
Quickly before we talk about the way forward, because it's a new year and activities are lined up already. For example, AFCON. Now, I want you to talk on the issue of traditional sports. It's not thriving. How do we help this aspect of sports?
The traditional sport is thriving
because
locally.
It looks like it's only when we have the Argungu festival, that's when, or some of these festivals, that's when local sports come up.
You see, when we talk of the traditional sport, those who are dedicated to sponsor and encourage the sport, what are the programs they are bringing up to the government? For example, we have this traditional boxing, the Dembe, that our people do in the northern area. It's a very nice and encouraging, interesting sport. How many people are encouraging it? It's part of this federation sport in the traditional sport in the Prime Minister of Youth Development. But today I'm telling you, they are backward. People believe because the traditionalists, the people from the local areas enjoy this too. They invest money right from the local level, but we don't see, we think these people don't see anything. But those who are managing that sport are not encouraging that sport to come out for me and you to see it. But those of us who are into sport knows that these things are happening. Like we have this, the disabled sport. They are all part of the traditional sport too, because some of them is the same procedure that goes.
How do we leverage on efforts, on policies, international policies that we have regulating sporting activities? How do we leverage on them to impact on our sports?
I think the best thing to do is for the government to allow sport to be democratized, which is what they are doing right now.
Okay.
So that every federation will concentrate on its activity, whether international or locally. Okay. So that with international inclusion, we will now go that, yes, this is what we have, and What we can contribute to you, they make it known, just like the way the budget is being run and transparency is being enshrined in the country. And then if you go by that, the international policies are so clean. They are so black and white. They are not hidden. They are not something that you can push at the back door. So if Nigeria is ready to uphold this, and the Minister of Youth and Sport are ready to supervise sporting federations effectively going by that risk, governing it, I think sports will be a better place to be in Nigeria. And our kids will never leave, will always be happy. And all this youth restiveness we're having in the country today, I bet you, if you have 40% or 60% of those youth into sport today, Nigeria will be better. So until if the ministry, who are the managers of the game across board, are ready to supervise effectively. When I mean effectively, it's not black and white supervision. You must monitor. If we stand to do that, I bet you love to be in the sport field to watch all sorts of sports along the line.
Along the line. Okay, now it's 2022, so what's the way forward? How do we move sports forward in Nigeria?
We can only move sport forward if we decide to stop relying on government.
Okay.
I think that is the way forward. Let's rely on non-governmental. Let's rely on those who have interest in sport, those who are willing to sponsor sport, those who are giving the financial well-to-do to support sport. Go out and seek for sponsor. We have the companies, we have manufacturing the areas there. We have people who can sponsor sport in millions of naira. I think the best way the sport can thrive in Nigeria, let the sport itself decide to go outside and stop relying on government for funding. Until government itself decide to open policies that will encourage people to contribute to sport outside government, that is when sport will be all better for every one of us in the sports cycle.
Seydou Jibril Orji, thank you so much for your thoughts and insight this week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Just before we round off this episode, I feel like we may have left off some defining issues in our 2021 end of year series, which ended last week. I've therefore decided on a spin-off, and today I will bring you excerpts from two interviews. The first is a conversation I had with Cynthia Mbamalu, Programs Director at Yaga Africa, on democracy in Crucible. And our conversation touched on some very germane issues. I'm often conflicted with the principle of majority rule, like you just mentioned something about periodic elections. Like when it is said that democracy is a game of numbers, because sometimes in a democracy, the majority may get it wrong, not necessarily right. How have Nigeria now, that's what I mean, within our democratic practices, balanced majority rule with democratic principles which guarantee that minority groups and strata do not just have a voice and say, but that they are integral to the process?
Very important question, and that's because there's a tendency for majority rule to also translate to oppression of the minority. I mean, the sense that when we consistently determine our democracy based on the number game, there's a likelihood that minority voices would be oppressed or suppressed, just so that the majority would always rule. But that's not the idea of democracy, right? Now, democracy is about the people, and the people encompasses both the majority and the minority, meaning that in achieving democracy, you need to ensure that every section of the people, whether they form part of the majority or the minority, have their interests captured and catered for. So that's one angle to the conversation on how do we define who the people are, and how do we ensure that the majority rule does not result to the oppression of the minority. The second arm of this conversation is on who determines what the majority is, right? So let's talk about our elections, for instance. We say elections is a game of numbers. So the highest party with the party with the highest number of votes gets the win. However, if we're consistently having a turnout of voters that is less than 45%, yes, are you still with me?
Yes.
Yes. If we consistently have a turnout,
that, in addition to having the majority number of votes, you also need to have 2/3 majority spread.
Also. The spread. Yes. Thanks for pointing that out. You need to have the 2/3 majority spread for the national, presidential, for the governorship, and for the legislative offices. You just need simple majority.
Simple majority. That's true, of course.
So now the question is, in a system where you we struggle to have barely 45% turnout, for instance, for presidential elections. Can we necessarily say that it's the majority that has decided, even though we know that at the end, elections are determined by those who show up to turn out to vote? So there's also an angle on that. At what point do we really say that the majority is truly the majority, or rather those who are still, or rather those who just speak for the majority of the people? So that's the other angle to the conversation. But I think within all of this, the concept of democracy, I always want to start from that. It's about the people. It's beyond elections. It's about representation and inclusion. It's about fundamental rights. It's about accountability. Is about responsibility on the part of government, right? It's about citizens' representative relationship. So it's not just about an individual going into office. It's also about the ability of that individual to account to those who him or she represents, and also for institutions to respond or account to the people, to be responsible to the people. So if you look at all of this, you would see that when you talk about democracy, most times there's a likelihood in developing democracy for people to focus on the number games, to just say if we have won elections, if we have elections and we win elections, then there is a democracy, forgetting that it is beyond just conducting elections and winning elections.
Next, I would like to recall an interview on a matter I consider very important and maybe underreported. It revolves around migration and the place of migrants in the development process. Just to buttress some of what you said, and I'll take you back to the issue of that you raised earlier on national culture or identity and press culture. I understand that press culture can influence policy outcomes.
Yes.
But how significantly has that affected national policies of some countries across the world? And I mean, these policies vary from country to country. But, Father, hypothetically,
yes,
would a moderate press invariably and necessarily lead to a moderate immigration regime in a country?
Yes, I think I would say that without, going into deeper research to say that perception is a very high key in management of every issue. And perceptions most times are informed and formed by the press. So if the press puts out a very moderate approach and narrative that respects the humanity of the migrant and presents also the both sides of the story of migration, it will necessarily influence how the whole management of migration is done. For instance, one of the challenges that excited or incited xenophobia and racism in some countries are issues like when press put up there that migrants are swarming into our cities, migrants have taken up all our jobs, migrants are criminals. You know, all those type of things would necessarily incite such actions that are very detrimental to the well-being of migrants. And it will not be out of place to see that those on the political positions might also weigh into this, using such a narrative to make or score political points.
And that's it on this episode of the program. To join us same time next week for more on Insights. I'm Nnamdi Odikwo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. Be a brother skipper. We'll see you next week.